I'm Chloe, 27 years old from Boston. All my life, I felt like the puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit in my own family. My stepmother, Diane, has made sure of that since I was 7. But at my dad's 50th birthday party, everything changed. When she publicly humiliated me in front of everyone saying those words I'd always felt but never heard spoken aloud, something inside me finally broke free. Before I tell you what happened that night and how I stood my ground, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family. My parents divorced when I was just 5 years old. I remember the confusion more than the sadness back then. Dad moved out of our little house in the suburbs, and suddenly weekends became this strange ritual of packing a small backpack and sleeping in an unfamiliar apartment downtown. 2 years later, my dad introduced me to Diane. She was tall with perfect blonde hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. "This is my special friend." Dad had set his arm around her waist. Even at 7, I noticed how he seemed different around her, always checking her reactions before he spoke or made decisions. They got married 6 months later in a ceremony where I was allowed to scatter flower petals, but was seated with distant relatives during the reception. That was the first time I remember feeling like an accessory rather than a daughter. My biological mom struggled after the divorce. Depression and alcohol became her closest companions. There were nights when I'd find her crying on the couch, and mornings when I had to wake myself up for school because she couldn't. Despite her problems, she always told me she loved me even on her worst days. "You're the best thing I ever did, Chloe," she would say, smoothing my hair back from my forehead. With Dad and Diane, things were different. Diane had this way of creating rules without ever stating them. The kitchen was spotless and off limits for my messes. My bedroom door at their house stayed open at all times because we don't have secrets in this family. When I spoke too loudly or laughed too much, Diane would give me this look that instantly made me feel like I'd committed some terrible social crime. When I was 10, my half-brother Jake was born. 2 years later came Lily. Suddenly, I went from being Dad's daughter to the other kid. Family photos began featuring the 4 of them, with me awkwardly added to the edge, Diane's arm never quite extending to include me in her embrace. Christmas presents for them came in abundance, while mine became increasingly practical. "College fund contributions," Dad would explain with a forced smile. "You'll appreciate it when you're older." Dad changed after the babies arrived. He used to take me fishing on Saturday mornings or to the science museum when I visited. Those outings gradually disappeared, replaced by excuses about being tired or having family commitments. The word family started to feel like a door being closed in my face. When I was 13, they moved to a bigger house in a better school district for the kids. My room there was clearly an afterthought, a converted office space with no closet. "You're only here every other weekend anyway," Diane had said when I asked about the plastic storage bins that served as my dresser. Still, I tried. Every birthday card I made for Dad featured memories of our times together. Every school achievement I proudly reported, hoping for his approval. I joined the debate team because he once mentioned being on it in high school. I studied economics in my free time because that was his college major. When Jake and Lily had school performances or games, they were celebrated with dinners out and proud social media posts. When I made honor roll or won debate competitions, Dad would say, "That's nice," while glancing at his phone. Later, I'd see Facebook posts about how proud he was of his kids' achievements, with photos of only my half-siblings. Through high school, I maintained stellar grades, hoping academic success might finally earn me a secure place in Dad's life. I was accepted to Boston University with a partial scholarship. The day I got my acceptance letter, I called Dad immediately. "That's wonderful news," he said, his voice genuinely warm for once. Then I heard Diane in the background. "Tell her we'll call back. We're taking family portraits in 10 minutes. He never called back. Moving to Boston for college was both heartbreaking and freeing. The distance gave me perspective on the dynamics I'd been trapped in, but I still longed for Dad's approval. I called him once a week during my freshman year. He picked up maybe half the time. After college, I landed a job at a marketing firm in Boston and decided to stay. Going home for holidays became an exercise in emotional endurance. Diane would introduce me to her friends as Richard's daughter from his first marriage, never just as his daughter. The kids, now teenagers, seemed to have absorbed the unspoken hierarchy, rarely engaging with me directly. Last Christmas, something shifted. Dad pulled me aside after dinner and actually asked about my life. For 30 precious minutes, he listened as I told him about my work, my friends, my apartment. His eyes looked sad when he said, "I've missed so much of your life, haven't I?" Before I could answer, Diane called him away to help with dessert. Still, that moment gave me hope that maybe finally he was seeing me again. When the invitation came for his 50th birthday party, I felt a cautious optimism. Maybe this was our chance to truly reconnect. Little did I know how that night would change everything between us forever. The gold embossed invitation to Dad's 50th birthday party arrived on a Tuesday. I ran my fingers over the raised lettering, noting that Diane had used my correct address, even though we hadn't spoken directly in months. The formal wording indicated a sophisticated affair at Le Bistro, one of the most expensive restaurants in their town. "Join us for an evening celebrating Richard Thompson," it read, not Dad or Father, just Richard. Still, I felt a flutter of excitement. Dad turning 50 seemed significant, a milestone that might make him reflective about life and relationships, including me. Maybe our Christmas conversation had been the beginning of a new chapter for us. I carefully marked the date on my calendar and started planning. I wanted everything about my presence there to be perfect, to prove I belonged. I spent 3 weekends searching for the right gift, finally finding it in a small antique shop. A vintage pocket watch from the 1920s, similar to one Dad had admired in a museum when I was little. It cost nearly a month's worth of disposable income, but seeing his face when he opened it would be worth every penny. Next came the outfit. I needed something elegant, but not attention-seeking, something that said I was a successful adult, worthy of being acknowledged as family. After trying on 17 dresses, I found a classic navy blue cocktail dress that managed to be both sophisticated and appropriate. I scheduled a hair appointment and even splurged on professional makeup, something I never did for myself. The night before the party, my best friend Rachel called to check in. We'd been roommates in college, and she knew my family situation better than anyone. "So tomorrow's the big day with the Thompson royal family," she said, her tone deliberately light. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous, hopeful, terrified," I admitted. "I keep having this fantasy that Dad will make some speech about being proud of all his children, including me." "Honey," Rachel's voice softened, "I want that for you too. But remember who you're dealing with. Diane has been running this show for 20 years. "I know, but Dad seemed different at Christmas. Like he was finally seeing what's been happening." "Just protect your heart, okay? You deserve a father who treasures you, whether Richard steps up or not." After we hung up, I found myself remembering last summer's family reunion, where Diane had orchestrated a family tree presentation that somehow omitted my branch entirely. When my cousin pointed out the mistake, Diane had laughed it off as a formatting issue that never got corrected. Dad had said nothing, just looked uncomfortable, and changed the subject. For days leading up to the party, I rehearsed small talk and visualized positive interactions. I planned compliments for Diane to keep the peace and questions about Jake and Lily to show interest in their lives. I reminded myself to stay calm if Diane did her usual subtle exclusions. This night wasn't about her, or even me, I decided. It was about celebrating Dad. The morning of the party, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. The 3-hour drive to their suburb outside of Chicago felt both too long and too short. I practiced deep breathing techniques and played confidence-building music. "You are worthy of being there," I told my reflection in the rearview mirror. "You are his daughter, no matter what anyone says." I arrived at Le Bistro 45 minutes early, hoping to help with any last-minute preparations. The restaurant's elegant facade with its old-world charm made me smooth my dress nervously before entering. Inside staff were arranging centerpieces and placing name cards on tables. Diane was directing a server about the placement of the cake when she spotted me. Her expression flickered from surprise to annoyance before settling into a polite mask. "Chloe, you're very early." She gave me a brief, stiff hug. "I thought I might help with anything that needs doing," I offered with what I hoped was a winning smile. "Everything's under control," she said, her eyes already moving past me to check something across the room. "The family table is there at the front. Your card is at table 4 by the window." I tried to ignore the sting of being seated away from the family and focused on staying positive. As I walked toward table 4, I noticed it was positioned far from the main table filled with cards bearing names I barely recognized. Dad's golf buddies and Diane's distant cousins would be my dinner companions, it seemed. Jake and Lily arrived shortly after, now 17 and 15. Jake had Dad's height and easy smile, while Lily had inherited Diane's perfect posture and discerning gaze. I approached them with genuine warmth, missing the days when they were little, and would run to me for hugs before Diane trained them otherwise. "Hey guys, you both look great," I said, meaning it. "Jake, did you get your driver's license? And Lily, are you still killing it in debate?" They exchanged a quick look I couldn't interpret before Jake answered. "Yeah, got it last month, and Lily won regionals, just like her big sister used to," I said with a smile. Lily looked almost interested for a moment before Diane called them over. As they walked away, I overheard her telling someone, "We'll take the family photos right before dinner, just us four first, then we can add extended family." I swallowed hard but kept my smile in place. 20 years of practice had made me good at pretending these small cuts didn't bleed. Tonight was about building bridges, not burning them. Or so I thought. Le Bistro had been transformed for the occasion. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables covered in cream linen and adorned with arrangements of blue hydrangeas, Dad's favorite flowers. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and waiters circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. When Dad arrived, Diane at his side guests applauded. He looked handsome in his tailored suit, his salt and pepper hair styled in a way that made him appear younger than his 50 years. His face lit up with genuine surprise at the gathering, though I knew Diane would have involved him in at least some of the planning. I waited for a natural break in the receiving line to approach him, the gift box tucked under my arm. When he saw me, his smile seemed to warm. "Chloe, you made it." He embraced me briefly. "You look beautiful, kiddo." "Happy birthday, Dad," I said, savoring the moment of connection. "It's a wonderful party." "Richard, your brother wants to talk to you about that golf tournament," Diane interrupted, her hand sliding possessively around his arm. She nodded at me with a tight smile. "Excuse us, Chloe." And just like that, he was gone again, guided away as smoothly as if I were merely another well-wisher, rather than his firstborn child. I made my way to the bar, ordering a glass of wine to steady my nerves. A distant aunt approached me, her face showing the strain of trying to place exactly who I was. "Chloe, right, Richard's daughter. We haven't seen you in ages." "I've been in Boston for work," I explained, "but we keep in touch." The lie tasted bitter. "That's nice. Your father is so proud of those kids. Jake's applying to colleges now, isn't he? Following in his father's footsteps with economics." I nodded and smiled, accustomed to these conversations, where people unintentionally highlighted my exclusion from the family narrative. As she moved on, I tried to join a group that included my father's sisters, standing at the edges of their conversation circle as they discussed family holiday plans. "We should rent that lake house again for 4th of July, one aunt suggested. "Definitely. The kids had such a blast last year," another agreed. I wanted to remind them that I hadn't been invited to this apparent family tradition, but instead sipped my wine and eventually drifted away when no opening in the conversation appeared. When the photographer began arranging people for photos, I watched as Diane efficiently organized just the immediate family first. Dad, Diane, Jake, and Lily posed by the decorative fireplace, all coordinated in complementary colors. I noticed Jake glance my way once with an unreadable expression. Additional groupings were called extended family friends from different parts of Dad's life, colleagues. Somehow I was never included in any configuration. When I finally stepped forward during a general group photo, Diane physically placed her hand on my shoulder and guided me to the side. "Let's get the cousins together first," she said smoothly, though no such photo had been on her list. As dinner approached, I found a moment when Dad was briefly alone, admiring the cake display. I approached with the carefully wrapped box. "Dad, I wanted to give you this. Happy birthday." His eyes softened as he took the package. "You didn't need to get me anything, Chloe." "I wanted to. It reminded me of that day at the museum when I was 9. You remember?" Before he could answer, Diane appeared with the event coordinator. "Richard, they need to know about the seating for the speeches." She looked pointedly at the gift, then at me. "We're doing gifts at the end, Chloe. There's a table for them over there. Dad handed the box back to me with an apologetic shrug. Later, okay, kiddo. During dinner, I tried to engage with the strangers at my table, but found it hard to concentrate as I watched the animated conversation and laughter at the main family table. After the meal, Diane took the microphone for the first speech. 23 wonderful years ago, I met the love of my life. She began, her voice thick with emotion. And since then, we've built a beautiful life and family together. She continued for several minutes talking about their journey, never once acknowledging Dad's life before her or my existence. When she raised her glass for a toast, her eyes swept the room but skipped over the corner where I sat. To my amazing husband, and to our beautiful children who make our family complete. Other speeches followed from Dad's brother, from business partners, from old friends. When the toast seemed to be winding down, I gathered my courage and approached the microphone. Diane's eyes widened slightly, but social convention prevented her from stopping me outright. Hi, everyone. I began, my voice steadier than I felt. For those who don't know me, I'm Chloe Richards' daughter. I saw a few confused glances, people who clearly had no idea Dad had another child. I pressed on. Dad, I just wanted to say how much I've always admired your work ethic and integrity. The way you taught me to always stand up for what's right even when it's difficult. Those lessons have shaped who I am today. I raised my glass, looking directly at him. For a moment, our eyes met, and I thought I saw something like recognition, maybe even regret. But before I could finish my toast, Lily spilled her water glass, creating a distraction. As servers rushed to help, Diane smoothly took the microphone from my hand. Let's move on to the cake, she announced brightly. As the evening progressed, I tried once more to connect with my half-siblings. When I noticed Lily struggling with her phone trying to take photos of the dessert table, I offered to help. Here, if you stand at this angle, the lighting's better, I suggested, showing her how to frame the shot. I don't need your help, Lily said stiffly, but I could tell she was implementing my suggestion. You know, I took a photography class in college. I could show you some basic techniques sometime. Your Instagram would look amazing. Before Lily could respond, Diane appeared beside us. Lily, darling, Grandma is looking for you. She waited until Lily left before turning to me, her voice just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Stop trying to interfere with my children. I've noticed you following them around all evening. It's making everyone uncomfortable. I was just helping her with a photo, I said, feeling my cheeks flush. She's my sister. Diane's face hardened. Half-sister, and barely that. You show up a few times a year and think you can insert yourself into our lives. You're not really part of this family. Why are you even here? The words landed like physical blows. Conversations around us stuttered to silence as people realized what was happening. I saw Dad across the room, finally noticing the confrontation, his expression moving from confusion to concern. In that moment, 20 years of exclusion, of being erased, of swallowing my pain, crystallized into perfect clarity. The room seemed to hold its breath as everyone waited to see how I would respond to this public humiliation. My voice came out calm and clear, carrying in the sudden silence. I've always been his daughter, even when you tried to make him forget. The silence that followed my words felt like it stretched into eternity. I could see the shock register on faces around the room, mouths slightly open, eyes wide. Dad stood, frozen champagne glass halfway to his lips, while Diane's face flushed deep red. For a moment, no one moved. Then Diane let out a forced laugh, too high and brittle. Always so dramatic. This is exactly what I mean about making people uncomfortable. But her recovery attempt fell flat. I could see in the uncomfortable expressions around us that her mask had slipped too far this time. People had seen the truth behind the perfect family facade she'd constructed so carefully. Without another word, I walked to the gift table and placed the carefully wrapped box containing the vintage pocket watch on top. I looked directly at my father, whose eyes now held a dawning horror, as if he was seeing the situation clearly for the first time. Happy birthday, Dad, I said quietly. I didn't run, I didn't cry. I walked with measured steps through the restaurant, head high, nodding politely to confused guests as I passed. Only when I reached my car in the parking lot did I allow my composure to crumble. The tears came in violent waves, 20 years of suppressed hurt pouring out in gasping sobs that left me clutching the steering wheel. All those years of trying to be perfect enough, quiet enough, successful enough to earn a place in my father's heart. All those times I'd pretended not to notice the exclusion, the subtle digs, the erasure of my existence from the family narrative. Every birthday where my card arrived weeks late with a generic message and an impersonal gift card. Every Christmas where I sat among them, but never with them. My phone buzzed with a text message. Through blurred vision, I saw it was from Jake. "What you said was brave. Mom's been terrible to you for years. I'm sorry I never said anything." I stared at the message in disbelief. My half-brother, who had always been polite but distant, had been aware of the dynamic all along. I didn't know whether to feel validated or more hurt that he'd recognized the truth, but remained silent. As I drove away from the restaurant, my mind replayed the scene over and over. Had I ruined any chance of reconciliation with my father? Had I just burned the last bridge by publicly calling out what everyone pretended not to see? But beneath the anxiety and doubt, I felt something else stirring relief. The relief of finally speaking my truth after decades of silence. When I reached my hotel room, I called Rachel. Her voice was the anchor I needed in the emotional storm. "Oh my God, Chloe, what happened?" she asked immediately, sensing my distress. Through broken sentences and fresh tears, I recounted the evening's events. Rachel listened without interrupting, just making occasional sounds of outrage or support. "I'm coming over," she said when I finished. "I can be there in 3 hours. Don't argue." "You don't need to drive all that way. I'm okay." "You're not okay, and that's perfectly fine. I'm bringing emergency supplies, ice cream face masks, and those ridiculous fuzzy socks you like." True to her word, Rachel arrived shortly after midnight laden with bags from the 24-hour convenience store. She wrapped me in a fierce hug before unpacking her emotional first aid kit. As we sat cross-legged on the hotel bed eating ice cream straight from the container, Rachel helped me process what had happened. "You know what I keep thinking about?" I said, digging my spoon into the chocolate chip cookie dough. "All the family therapists I've seen over the years told me I needed to communicate my feelings more clearly, to use I statements and all that. But no one ever told me what to do when the other person simply doesn't want to hear it." "Because most therapists assume families actually want to resolve their issues," Rachel replied. "They don't have a playbook for parents who choose their new families over their existing children." The worst part is that I still love him. After everything, I still want my dad to love me back. "That's not the worst part. That's the most human part," Rachel said, squeezing my hand. "The question is, what are you going to do now?" My phone had been lighting up with notifications throughout the evening, calls and texts from family members, some expressing support, others criticizing my scene-making. Dad had called 3 times but left no messages. Diane had sent a text that simply read, "I hope you're satisfied with yourself." "I think I need to turn this off and just breathe for a while," I said, powering down my phone. "Tomorrow is soon enough to deal with the fallout." Rachel nodded. "Good call. Tonight is for processing, not responding. Tomorrow, you can decide who deserves your energy and who doesn't." As the sugar rush from the ice cream faded, exhaustion took over. Rachel insisted on staying the night, setting up a makeshift bed on the sofa in my hotel room. Just before drifting off to sleep, I realized that for the first time in my adult life, I felt neither hope nor disappointment about my relationship with my father. Instead, I felt the strange weightlessness of having finally spoken my truth out loud. I woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the quiet sounds of Rachel making coffee in the hotel room's small kitchenette. For a blissful moment, I existed in the peaceful space between sleeping and waking, before memories of the previous night came flooding back. "Morning warrior woman," Rachel said, handing me a steaming cup. "How are you feeling?" "Like I survived an earthquake," I replied honestly. "Everything's still standing, but the foundation is completely different." I powered up my phone with trepidation. 7 missed calls, 15 text messages, and numerous social media notifications awaited me. The one that caught my eye was from Dad, sent at 3:17 a.m. "Please call me when you can." After Rachel left for the drive back to Boston, promising to check in later, I sat on the edge of the bed staring at my father's message. Part of me wanted to ignore it to protect myself from more disappointment. But another part, the part that had always longed for his attention, couldn't resist the pull. He answered on the first ring, his voice rough as if he hadn't slept. "Chloe, Thank you for calling back. Hi, Dad, I said, keeping my tone neutral. About last night, he began, then paused. I'm sorry things got out of hand. Diane was stressed about making everything perfect, and she didn't mean what she said. The familiar pattern of excuses made my heart sink. She meant exactly what she said, Dad. She's felt that way for 20 years. The only difference is that she finally said it out loud. That's not fair, Chloe. Diane has always tried to include you. Include me? I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. Dad, I was seated with strangers at your birthday party. I've been excluded from family photos, family vacations, and family traditions my entire life. Every time I visit, I'm reminded that I'm an outsider. You're being overdramatic. Diane has always been nothing but nice to you. Nice? The word felt inadequate for the years of subtle undermining. Dad nice is surface-level politeness. Nice is what you are to the mail carrier or a cashier. A stepmother is supposed to be kind, supportive, and inclusive, especially to a child who's already lost one parent to divorce. There was a long silence. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its defensive edge. I never saw it that way. I guess I was so focused on making my new marriage work, on not repeating my mistakes with your mother. So I became the casualty of your second chance, I finished for him. The living reminder of your failed first attempt at family. That's not what I meant. But his protest sounded weak even to him, I could tell. Dad, I've spent my whole life trying to be worthy of your attention, trying to earn my place in your family. Do you have any idea what it's like to visit your father's house and see walls covered with photos where you don't exist? To hear stories about family trips you weren't invited on? To have your own father introduce you as my daughter from my first marriage, as if you need a qualifier to explain why you don't quite belong? His breathing had become uneven on the other end of the line. I never meant to hurt you, Chloe. But you did hurt me over and over again, and you let Diane hurt me too. What kind of father does that? The question hung between us raw and unanswerable. Finally, he sighed heavily. I don't know what to say except that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. The apology felt both monumental and insufficient. I'm not sure that's enough anymore, Dad. After we hung up, I felt drained, but somehow lighter. For the first time, I'd spoken my complete truth to my father, without softening it to protect his feelings, or preserve a relationship that existed more in my hopes than in reality. Over the next few days, messages continued to arrive from various family members. My Aunt Julia, Dad's sister, sent a supportive text. Been waiting 20 years for someone to stand up to Diane's nonsense. Proud of you, niece. Cousins I rarely saw expressed surprise and confusion, having absorbed the narrative that I was the distant one, who chose not to participate in family events. Diane predictably began a campaign to control the narrative. My Aunt Julia reported that Diane was telling everyone I'd had some kind of emotional breakdown at the party, painting me as unstable and attention-seeking. Some relatives believed her. Others who had witnessed the interaction firsthand were less convinced. I returned to Boston and threw myself into work, grateful for the distraction. I declined the invitation to Thanksgiving at Dad's house, choosing instead to spend it with Rachel's family, who had been including me in their holidays for years. The acceptance I felt among them, the ease of belonging without having to earn it, highlighted everything my relationship with Dad and Diane had lacked. During this time, I finally sought professional help to process my family trauma. My therapist, Dr. Winters, helped me understand the dynamics I'd been trapped in. What you're describing is a classic case of emotional neglect in blended families, she explained during one session. Your father and stepmother created a new family unit that excluded you, but because there was no overt abuse, the damage was invisible even to them. I kept thinking if I just tried harder, achieved more, complained less, then I'd finally be good enough to include. That's a common response, but the truth is that you were always good enough. The failure was theirs, not yours. Through therapy, I began to recognize patterns in other relationships where I overperformed to earn affection, where I accepted minimal effort from others while giving everything of myself. I learned about emotional boundaries and the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself, Dr. Winters told me. It's releasing the anger so it doesn't poison you. Reconciliation is different. That requires both parties to acknowledge the harm and commit to change. When Christmas approached, I made the difficult decision not to attend the family gathering. Instead, I volunteered at a local shelter and spent Christmas Eve with friends creating new traditions that didn't leave me feeling hollow inside. Jake texted me on Christmas Day. "Missed you today. Dad kept looking at your empty chair." It was a small thing, but it suggested that my absence had been felt, that the space I occupied in the family, however marginalized, was at least visible now. 3 months after the party incident, I was sorting through mail in my apartment when my buzzer rang. When I answered, the doorman's voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Thompson, there's a Richard Thompson here to see you. Says he's your father." My heart jumped into my throat. "Send him up, please." Minutes later, there was a soft knock at my door. When I opened it, I barely recognized the man standing before me. Dad looked like he had aged years in the months since his birthday. His shoulders slumped slightly, and new lines etched his face. "Chloe," he said softly. "May I come in?" I stepped back to allow him entry, noticing he carried a small bag. My apartment suddenly felt too small, too intimate for this unexpected reunion. "Can I get you something to drink? Coffee, water?" I offered, falling back on politeness to mask my confusion. "Water would be great, thanks." As I filled a glass in the kitchen, I watched him take in my living space, his eyes lingering on the bookshelf where a single framed photo showed the two of us at my high school graduation, the last milestone he'd attended. I handed him the water and gestured to the couch. "This is a surprise," I said, sitting across from him in an armchair. "I should have called first," he acknowledged, "but I was afraid you might say no." "Why are you here, Dad?" He set down the water glass without drinking. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since the party, about what you said about how things have been." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I remembered from childhood. "I've been seeing someone, a therapist, trying to understand how we got here. I hadn't expected this. That's good. I've made so many mistakes, Chloe, with your mother, with you. When I married Diane, I was determined to make it work, to be a better husband than I'd been to your mom. Somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that meant putting Diane's needs and comfort above everything else, including you." His candor caught me off guard. "You chose her over me over and over again." "Yes," he admitted, and the simple acknowledgement felt momentous. I told myself it was for the greater good, that one unhappy child was better than another broken marriage and two more unhappy children. I told myself you were resilient, that you had your mother, that you were doing fine in school, so you must be okay. I wasn't okay, Dad. I know that now. His voice cracked slightly. My therapist helped me see that I've been using Diane as a shield, letting her set the boundaries of our family to avoid making difficult decisions myself. I abdicated my responsibility as your father because it was easier than standing up to her or examining my own failings. I sat in stunned silence, never having expected such self-awareness from him. "I'm not here to make excuses," he continued. "There aren't any that would be good enough. I failed you, Chloe. I wasn't the father you deserved, and no amount of apologizing can give you back the childhood you should have had." Tears pricked at my eyes, but I held them back. "Then why are you here?" "Because I want to try to be a better father to you now, if you'll let me. Not because I expect forgiveness, but because you deserve better, and it's long past time I stepped up." "And Diane, what does she think about this?" A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "Diane and I are working through some things. Your confrontation at the party forced a lot of issues into the open. We're in counseling, but I'm here on my own, making my own decision to try to repair my relationship with you, regardless of what happens with my marriage." "I don't want to be put in the middle of your marital problems," I said firmly. "You won't be. This is about you and me, no one else." He reached for the bag he'd brought. "I have something for you." He pulled out the gift box I'd left at his party. I opened this the next day. It's incredible, Chloe. I remember that day at the museum so clearly, pointing out that pocket watch collection and telling you about my grandfather's watch that was lost in a move when I was a kid. His fingers traced the delicate engraving on the case. The fact that you remembered after all these years, when I've missed so much of your life. It hit me hard. The watch had been an impulse purchase far beyond my budget, but seeing his genuine appreciation made it worth every penny. "I'd like to try something new," he said tentatively. "Maybe we could meet for lunch every few weeks, just the two of us. No Diane, no Jake or Lily, just a father and daughter getting to know each other again." The offer was so simple, so normal, yet it represented everything I'd wanted for decades. "I'd like that," I said cautiously. "But I need to be clear about something. I'm not going to pretend the past didn't happen, and I'm not going to put myself in situations where I'll be treated like an outsider again." "That's more than fair," he agreed. "I know I have a lot to prove, and it will take time to rebuild trust. I'm prepared for that." Before he left, we made plans for lunch the following weekend. As I closed the door behind him, I felt neither the desperate hope nor the crushing disappointment that had characterized our relationship for so long. Instead, I felt the cautious optimism of a new beginning built on honest communication rather than wishful thinking. Over the next few months, Dad kept his word. We met regularly for lunch or coffee sometimes, just talking, other times visiting museums or bookstores we both enjoyed. He asked questions about my life, my work, my friends, and actually listened to the answers. He told me stories about his own childhood that I'd never heard before, gradually filling in the blanks of our shared history. When he suggested a dinner with Jake and Lily without Diane, I agreed with trepidation. The meeting was awkward at first, years of enforced distance, creating barriers between siblings who barely knew each other. But as the evening progressed, something shifted. Jake admitted he'd always felt guilty about the way I was treated, but hadn't known how to challenge the family dynamic as a child. Lily, more reserved nevertheless, shared her admiration for my independence and career success. "Mom always made it seem like you didn't want to be around us," she confessed. "But that wasn't true, was it?" "No," I said gently. "I always wanted to be your big sister. I just wasn't allowed to be." Slowly, tentatively, we began to build relationships as adults free from the constraints Diane had placed on our interactions. I learned that Jake had abandoned economics for environmental science, much to our father's initial disappointment. Lily revealed her interest in photography had deepened, inspired partly by our brief conversation at the party. Small connections, fragile but real, began to form between us. Dad, true to his word, maintained our relationship independently of his ongoing issues with Diane. He never shared details of their counseling or discussions about me respecting the boundary I'd set. When I asked Dr. Winters if this was a healthy approach, she nodded approvingly. "You're establishing a direct relationship with your father for the first time without Diane as gatekeeper. That's significant progress for both of you." A year after the fateful birthday party, I found myself reflecting on the remarkable changes in my family relationships. The painful confrontation that night had been like lancing a wound, releasing decades of festering hurt, and allowing genuine healing to begin. Dad and I now spoke weekly and saw each other at least twice a month, building a relationship based on honest communication rather than obligation. During one of our museum visits, he'd quietly said, "I'm proud of the woman you've become, Chloe. Not despite the obstacles I put in your way, but because you had the strength to overcome them." Diane remained a complicated figure in my life. While our interactions were now characterized by cautious politeness rather than veiled hostility, she had never directly acknowledged or apologized for her role in my exclusion from the family. Through conversations with Dad, I learned that her own childhood had featured a stepmother who favored biological children, creating a complex web of insecurity and defensiveness that she'd projected onto our relationship. Understanding didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped me view her with compassion rather than resentment. I maintained appropriate boundaries with her, while building separate relationships with Dad and my half-siblings. Jake and I had developed a surprisingly close bond, his environmental activism dovetailing with my marketing expertise, in ways that led to professional collaboration as well as personal connection. Lily, initially more reserved, gradually opened up after I helped her develop a photography portfolio for college applications, our shared interest providing neutral ground for building trust. My professional life flourished as well. Freed from the constant quest for parental approval, I channeled my energy into projects I truly cared about. This authentic engagement led to a promotion at work, where my ability to navigate complex relationships and communicate difficult truths became recognized strengths rather than personal coping mechanisms. I'd even begun dating someone who understood the importance of family, but respected healthy boundaries. Michael had his own complicated family history, making him uniquely understanding of my ongoing healing journey. When he suggested meeting my father, I was able to arrange the introduction without the anxiety that would have once accompanied such an event. As my relationship with my biological family improved, I also deepened my connections with chosen family members like Rachel, who had stood by me through the darkest times. I learned that family could take many forms, and that blood relationships weren't automatically more meaningful than chosen ones. What mattered was mutual respect, genuine care, and the willingness to work through difficulties together. For Dad's 51st birthday, he requested a small dinner rather than a large party. Just him, me, Jake, Lily, and a few close friends. Diane attended briefly but left early an arrangement that seemed to work for everyone involved. During the meal, he spontaneously raised his glass. "I want to toast my daughter Chloe," he said, his voice warm with pride, not only for her recent promotion, but for having the courage to speak her truth when the rest of us were too comfortable with our illusions. The simple introduction, my daughter without qualifiers or explanations, felt like a long-awaited homecoming. Later that evening, as we enjoyed dessert, Dad reflected on the changes of the past year. "You know when you said that line at my party last year about always being my daughter? Even when I tried to forget, it was like someone finally turned on the lights in a dark room. I couldn't pretend anymore, couldn't keep living in the story Diane and I had constructed where everything was perfect, as long as we didn't acknowledge the damage we were causing." It wasn't an easy thing to say, I admitted, but it was true. Truth is rarely easy, he agreed, but necessary. My journey from outsider to recognized family member taught me that biological connections are just the beginning of family, not its definition. True family, whether related by blood or by choice, sees you completely and loves you anyway. It makes room at the table without being asked. It acknowledges harm when it occurs and works to repair it. The healing wasn't perfect or complete. There were still awkward moments, still occasional missteps as we navigated our new relationship dynamics. Diane and I might never develop the warm relationship my younger self had once craved, but I no longer measured my worth by her acceptance or anyone else's. I had learned to validate my own experiences and to set boundaries that protected my emotional well-being. Forgiveness, I discovered, wasn't about erasing the past or pretending the hurt never happened. It was about releasing the anger so it no longer controlled my present and future. It was a gift I gave myself, not an absolution I owed to others. In speaking my truth that night, I had freed not only myself but my entire family from the weight of pretense. The painful words, "You're not really part of this family," had paradoxically opened the door to becoming genuinely included for the first time. By refusing to accept the role of convenient outsider any longer, I had created space for authentic connection based on truth rather than appearances. As I look forward to building stronger relationships with both my biological and chosen family members, I often think about what family truly means. Is it defined by shared DNA, shared history, or shared values? Is it about who shows up when you're celebrating, who stands by you when you're struggling, or who tells you the hard truths when you need to hear them? What does family mean to you? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if my story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who might need to hear that they deserve a place at the family table too. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply speak your truth, even when your voice shakes.